They looked at her hood, her sneakers, and her skin, and they saw a problem. They didn't see the woman who had just signed the largest liquidity deal in aviation history. When the flight attendant sneered and the police grabbed her wrists, they thought they were removing a non-compliant passenger from seat 1A. They had no idea they were actively destroying their own company. It took 45 minutes to drag her off the plane, but it only took her 45 seconds to destroy their entire future. This isn't just a story about bad customer service. This is a masterclass in financial warfare. Here is how one CEO turned a moment of humiliation into a $5 billion lesson in respect. The air inside the bridge connecting JFK Terminal 4 to the fuselage of the Airbus A350-1000 smelled of jet fuel and recycled coffee. For Vivienne Toussaint, it was the smell of victory, though she was too exhausted to celebrate. Vivienne adjusted the cuffs of her Loro Piana cashmere hoodie. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired graduate student, or perhaps a backup dancer for a touring hip-hop artist. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, utilitarian bun. On her feet were vintage Nike Dunks, worn soft with age. The only hint of her status was the watch on her left wrist, a Patek Philippe Nautilus with a Tiffany dial. But she wore it turned inward, the face resting against her pulse, invisible to the world. She was the managing partner of Kestrel Vanguard, a private equity behemoth that specialized in distressed assets. She had just spent 72 hours in a windowless boardroom in Singapore, finalizing the acquisition of a failing logistics chain. Now, all she wanted was to sleep for the 7-hour flight to London Heathrow. She approached the cabin door. The flight purser, a woman with a smile that didn't reach her eyes named Patricia, glanced at Vivienne's boarding pass. "Seat 1A," Vivienne murmured, stepping forward. Patricia didn't move. She looked at the digital scanner, then at Vivienne, then back at the scanner. Her eyes flicked up and down Vivienne's attire, lingering on the hoodie. "Can I see your physical ticket, please?" Patricia asked. Her tone was sugary, but brittle. "Sometimes the mobile apps glitch with upgrades." Vivienne didn't blink. She unlocked her phone again and held it out. "It's not an upgrade. I bought the fare full price, 2 weeks ago." Patricia took the phone, her perfectly manicured nail tapping the screen unnecessarily hard. "Right. Well, just hold on a second. Stand to the side, please. I need to clear the rest of Group 1. "I am Group 1, Vivienne said, her voice low and smooth like polished obsidian. "Actually, I'm pre-boarding. I'm just late." "And now you're holding up the line," Patricia snapped, the mask slipping. "Stand to the side." Vivienne took a deep breath. She could have made a scene. She could have pulled out the titanium card in her pocket. But she was tired. She stepped to the left, leaning against the curved plastic wall of the jet bridge, watching as a parade of suits and designer luggage streamed past her. That was when he arrived. Brock Holloway was the kind of man who took up space even when he wasn't moving. He was loud, wearing a bespoke navy suit that was slightly too tight across the chest, likely to emphasize gym hours. He was on the phone, barking into his AirPods. "I don't care what the SEC filing says. Tell the old man to sell," Brock shouted, oblivious to the people around him. He marched up to the door, flashing a platinum status card. Patricia's face transformed. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a radiant, fawning adoration. "Mr. Holloway, welcome back to Skyway Atlantic. We have your usual scotch ready." Brock didn't even look at her. He just nodded and tried to push past, but his carry-on, a massive, hard-shell Rimowa, clipped Vivienne's shin. He stopped and looked down at her. He didn't apologize. He looked at her hoodie, then scoffed. "Crew baggage is supposed to be loaded underneath, sweetheart. Don't block the entrance." Vivian looked up, her eyes cold. "I'm not crew." Brock laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Right. Economy is that way, then. Back of the bus." He brushed past her, entering the first-class cabin. Vivian turned to Patricia. "I've been standing here for 5 minutes. My seat is 1A. That man just walked into the cabin. Am I boarding, or do I need to call the Port Authority to report theft of service?" Patricia's lips thinned into a straight line. She realized she couldn't stall any longer without a valid reason. "Fine, go ahead. But keep your voice down. We have VIPs on board today." Vivian walked onto the plane. She turned left, entering the sanctuary of the first-class suites. The lighting was dim and amber-hued. She found seat 1A, the prime suite with the most privacy. She stopped. Brock Holloway was sitting in seat 1A. He had his jacket off, his shoes off, and a glass of champagne in his hand. He was already spreading paperwork out on the tray table. Vivian stood at the entrance of the suite. "Excuse me, you're in my seat." Brock didn't look up from his iPad. "Check your ticket again. I'm settled." "I don't need to check. I booked 1A specifically," Vivian said. "You are in the wrong seat." Brock finally looked up, swirling his champagne. He looked at her with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Look, I know they sometimes oversell these things or give staff past travelers the empty spots, but I need the space to work. I'm closing a deal that's worth more than your entire neighborhood. Go find an empty seat in business." Vivian felt that familiar heat in her chest, the heat that usually preceded a hostile takeover. "I suggest you move," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Now." Brock hit the call button. Patricia appeared instantly, rushing from the galley. "Is there a problem, Mr. Holloway?" "This person is harassing me," Brock said, gesturing vaguely at Vivian. "She's confused about her seat assignment. Can you escort her to her actual seat? It's ruining my pre-flight calm." Patricia turned to Vivian, her hands clasped, her posture rigid. "Ma'am, let me see your boarding pass again." Vivian held it up. It clearly displayed JFK, LHR, ST1A. Patricia looked at it. Then she looked at Brock. Brock gave her a look of conspiracy, of shared understanding between people who matter. He winked. "Patty, darling, surely there's a seat in row 40, or maybe the jump seat." Patricia made a decision. It was a decision based on bias, on assumption, and on the fact that Brock Holloway was a platinum key holder who tipped the crew in cash, while Vivian looked like she was flying on miles she'd stolen. "Ma'am," Patricia said, her voice icy, "there has been a duplicate booking error. Mr. Holloway is a priority partner with Skyway Atlantic. He will be retaining this suite." "That is not how ticketing works," Vivian said. "I paid cash, $9,400. Get him out of my seat." "I can offer you a seat in premium economy," Patricia said, acting as if she were offering gold bullion. "It has extra legroom, and a voucher for $50. The cabin had gone silent. Other passengers were watching. "I am not moving," Vivian said. She took a step into the suite and placed her bag on the ottoman. "And if you touch my property, I will have you charged with assault." Patricia's face flushed red. "You need to step back into the galley. Now. You are becoming aggressive." "I am standing still," Vivian said. "He is in my seat. I'm the captain of this cabin," Patricia hissed, "and I am ordering you to vacate first class. You simply don't fit the atmosphere we are trying to maintain here." There it was. The coded language. Vivian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile a shark gives before it rolls its eyes back. "You want me to leave?" Vivian asked softly. "I want you off my plane," Patricia said. The stalemate lasted for 6 minutes. The pilot, Captain Jeffrey Miller eventually emerged from the cockpit. He was a weary man who just wanted to push back from the gate. But when Patricia whispered in his ear, using words like belligerent, threat, and refusal to comply, he sighed and nodded. He didn't even look at Vivian. He trusted his lead flight attendant. "Call the police," Miller said. Vivian stood in the galley, leaning against a beverage cart. She had pulled out her phone and was typing rapidly. She wasn't texting a friend. She wasn't recording a TikTok. She was logging into the secure terminal of the Kestrel Vanguard mainframe. She sent 3 messages. 1, to legalerkestrelvanguard.com. Subject, urgent. Prepare for immediate injunctive relief and contract review. Skyway Atlantic. 2, to Jonathan.g, CFO. Subject, the Omega Clause. Initiate immediately upon my signal. 3, to personal assistant. Find out who Brock Holloway is. I want his portfolio, his debts, and his weaknesses. You have 10 minutes. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer to the jet bridge. Brock Holloway, still sitting in Vivian's seat, called out loud enough for the cabin to hear. They let anyone in these days, probably used a stolen credit card. A few passengers chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable. One man, an older gentleman in seat 2F, looked like he wanted to speak up, but Patricia glared him into silence. 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department boarded the plane. They were large, imposing men, already agitated by the call of a disturbance. They saw Vivian, a black woman in a hoodie, standing defiantly in the galley, and the narrative Patricia spun fit perfectly into their biases. "Ma'am, grab your bags," the first officer said. His name tag read, Officer Kowalski. "Let's go." "I have a valid ticket," Vivian said calmly. She held her hands up, palms open, showing she was unarmed and non-threatening. "I have broken no laws. This airline is in breach of contract." "This isn't a courtroom," Kowalski said, stepping into her personal space. "The captain wants you off. That means you're trespassing. Walk off, or we drag you off. I would advise you to check the passenger manifest and my identity before you put your hands on me," Vivian said. Her heart was hammering, but her voice was steady. "My name is Vivian Toussaint. If you remove me forcibly, the consequences for this airline will be catastrophic." Yeah, you're the Queen of England," the second officer sneered. He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. Vivian flinched. "Do not touch me." "Resisting!" the officer shouted. It happened fast. Too fast. They didn't give her a chance to walk. They spun her around. One officer kicked her legs apart while the other wrenched her arms behind her back. The pain in her shoulder was blinding. The handcuffs clicked, cold, tight, and biting into her skin. "Stop!" the man in 2F finally shouted, standing up. She wasn't doing anything. She just wanted her seat. "Sit down, sir, or you're coming too," Patricia yelled, pointing a finger at him. Brock Holloway stood up in the aisle, holding his phone, recording. "World star," he mocked. "Take out the trash, boys." Vivian was shoved forward. She stumbled, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. The officers marched her down the aisle, past the first-class pods, past the economy comfort section, where passengers craned their necks to see the criminal. Phones were raised. Flashes went off. She locked eyes with Patricia as she was dragged past the galley. "You have made a mistake," Vivian said. She wasn't shouting. She spoke with a terrifying finality. "Banned for life," Patricia smirked, waving a printed flight manifest like a fan. "Enjoy the no-fly list." They dragged her onto the jet bridge. The cool air hit her face. The humiliation was total. Every eye in the terminal was on her as she was frog-marched past the gate agent desk. But as they pushed her toward the elevator to take her to the airport holding cell, Vivian's phone, which the officer had shoved into her hoodie pocket, buzzed against her ribs. It was the reply from her assistant. She couldn't read it, but she knew what it meant. The dossier was ready. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the view of the Skyway Atlantic jet, Vivian closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Crying was for people who didn't have leverage. She began to count backward from 10. By the time she reached 1, she wasn't Vivian the passenger anymore. She was Vivian Toussaint, the apex predator of Wall Street, and she was about to turn Skyway Atlantic into a carcass. The holding cell at JFK's Terminal 4 was a stark, fluorescent-lit box that smelled of stale disinfectant and despair. It was a place designed to strip away dignity. The bench was cold steel, bolted to the concrete floor. The toilet in the corner had no seat. Vivian sat on the bench, her back straight, her legs crossed at the ankles. She had not spoken a word since they shoved her inside. The handcuffs had been removed, leaving angry red welts on her wrists, marks that would soon be photographed and plastered across every financial news network in the Western Hemisphere. Officer Kowalski sat at a metal desk outside the bars, typing slowly on a battered keyboard. He looked up occasionally, expecting the woman in the hoodie to start crying, screaming, or demanding a phone call. She did none of those things. She just stared at the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. It was 8:45 p.m. The flight to London, Skyway Atlantic, Flight 909, had just taken off. Brock Halloway was currently sipping the scotch he had stolen from her, likely bragging to the cabin crew about how he handled the riff-raff. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor buzzed and swung open. A desk sergeant walked in, holding Vivian's confiscated belongings in a clear plastic bag. His face was pale. Not sick pale, terrified pale. "Kowalski," the sergeant said, his voice trembling slightly. A word. "Outside." "Just booking her now, Sarge. Trespassing and disorderly," Kowalski said, not looking up. "She's a mute one, though. Refused to give a name." "Get out here, now!" the sergeant barked. Kowalski jumped, the chair screeching against the floor. He walked into the hallway. The door didn't close all the way, and Vivian, with her sharp hearing, caught the hissed conversation. "Did you run her prints? Did you look at the ID in the wallet?" the sergeant whispered aggressively. "I was getting to it. It's just some unruly passenger. Probably drunk." "You moron. That isn't a passenger. That's Vivian Toussaint." "Who?" "A rapper. She dresses like one." "She's the managing partner of Kestrel Vanguard. Do you know who owns the debt on this airport? Kestrel Vanguard. Do you know who manages the pension fund for the Port Authority Police Union? Kestrel Vanguard." There was a silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. "She manages our pension?" Kowalski asked, his voice small. "She owns the company that manages our pension, and you just handcuffed her for sitting in a seat she paid for. The chief just got a call from the mayor and the governor, and I think a senator." The door swung open again. This time the sergeant entered the cell area with the reverence of a man approaching an unexploded bomb. He unlocked the cell door. "Ms. Toussaint," the sergeant said, his voice cracking. "There has been a significant misunderstanding. We have verified your ticket. It seems the airline was in error. You are free to go. We can offer you a ride to your residence." Vivian didn't move. She looked at her wrist, checking the time on her Patek Philippe, which they had thankfully not stripped from her. "I'm not leaving yet," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. The sergeant blinked. "Ma'am? My lawyer is 3 minutes away. He hates being late. If I leave, he'll have to chase me. I'll wait." 2 minutes and 45 seconds later, the precinct door flew open. Arthur Penhaligon swept into the room like a grim reaper in a 3-piece charcoal suit. Arthur was 60 years old, British, and cost $2,500 an hour. He didn't walk. He glided. He looked at the sergeant, then at Kowalski, then at the cell. "Get the camera, Arthur," Vivian said, finally standing up. Arthur didn't say hello. He pulled out a high-resolution camera and began photographing Vivian's wrists, the bruising on her shoulder, and the dirty floor of the cell. Assault causing bodily harm, false imprisonment, defamation, emotional distress. Arthur listed off the charges in a monotone voice, as if reading a grocery list. "And that's just for the civil suit against the department. The federal civil rights violation will be separate." "We were just following the captain's orders," Kowalski stammered. Arthur stopped and looked at the officer over his spectacles. "Standard Nuremberg defense. Never works. You had discretion. You chose violence." Vivian stepped out of the cell. She took the plastic bag from the shaking sergeant. She pulled out her phone. It had 40% battery left, enough to start a war. "Arthur," she said, tapping the screen, "get the jet ready. We're going to London. I have a board meeting to crash." "And the police?" Arthur asked. "Leave them," Vivian said, walking toward the exit. "They are irrelevant. They are just the hammer. I'm going after the hand that swung it." She stepped out into the cool night air of Queens. A black SUV was waiting. As she slid into the leather seat, she unlocked her phone and opened the file her assistant had sent regarding Brock Halloway. She read the first paragraph, and a slow, cold smile spread across her face. Subject: Brock Halloway. Occupation: Senior VP at Redstone Capital. Current status: heavily leveraged on Skyway Atlantic futures. Notes: Halloway is the lead underwriter for Skyway's new bond issuance. If Skyway stock drops below 40.000 ZECT, a share by market open tomorrow, Redstone faces a margin call that will bankrupt the firm. "Oh, Brock," Vivian whispered to the empty car. "You didn't just steal my seat. You bet your entire life on the plane staying in the air." She hit the dial button. "Jonathan, initiate the Omega clause and short Skyway. All of it." Vivian's private jet, a Gulfstream G700, was a flying boardroom. It was faster, quieter, and infinitely more luxurious than the first-class suite she had been dragged out of. As the jet climbed to 45,000 feet, cruising comfortably above the commercial lanes, Vivian sat before a bank of 3 monitors that had been deployed from the side table. On the center screen was Jonathan Gentry, the CFO of Kestrel Vanguard. He was in the London office. It was 2 a.m. there, but he looked wide awake. Behind him, a team of analysts was frantically working at terminals. "Are we sure about this, Viv?" Jonathan asked. "This is the nuclear option. We're talking about vaporizing $5 billion of liquidity. The market ripple will be massive." "They dragged me like a sack of potatoes, Jonathan," Vivian said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "They humiliated me. But worse, they showed incompetence. If they treat a strategic partner like a criminal because of a bias algorithm and a loud man in a suit, how are they maintaining their engines? How are they auditing their safety logs? Skyway Atlantic is a rot. We are just exposing it." "Understood," Jonathan said. He tapped a key. "The wire transfer for the $5 billion bailout loan was scheduled for 9 a.m. London time. I have cancelled the queue." "Good," Vivian said. "Now, look at the debt covenants. Paragraph 14, Section B." Jonathan scanned the document on his screen. "The material adverse change clause?" "No," Vivian said. "The reputational harm clause. It states that if the airline engages in conduct that brings significant disrepute or public scandal that threatens the collateral, the lender, us, can demand immediate repayment of all outstanding credit lines." "But the scandal hasn't broken yet," Jonathan argued. "It's just police chatter." "It breaks in 5 minutes," Vivian said. "I just sent the video from the passenger in 2F to TMZ, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. Arthur just filed the lawsuit in the Southern District of New York. It will hit the wire, now." On the right-hand monitor, a news ticker from Bloomberg flashed red. Breaking. Billionaire CEO Vivienne Toussaint dragged off Skyway flight. Alleges racial profiling. Sues for 100 mets. "There it is," Vivienne said. "Trigger the clause. Demand full repayment of the previous $2 billion loan. Give them 1 hour to pay." "They don't have the cash," Jonathan said. "They were waiting for our $5 billion to pay payroll." "Exactly," Vivienne said. "Insolvency." "And what about Holloway?" Jonathan asked. Vivienne pulled up the live stock chart for Skyway Atlantic, ticker SkyYA. It was currently trading in the after-hours market at $20,050. Redstone Capital, Holloway's firm, wrote, "Put options on the stock. They bet the stock would stay high to secure their commission. If the stock crashes, they are on the hook for the difference." Vivienne leaned into the microphone. "Jonathan, dump our entire holding of Skyway stock, 7% of the company. Dump it all into the open market right now." "Vivienne, that will cause a flash crash," Jonathan warned. "Do it." Jonathan nodded to his team. "Execute sell order. All tranches." The effect was instantaneous. On the graph, the line representing Skyway Atlantic's value didn't just dip. It fell off a cliff. $22.50. 19 $, $17.50. Algorithms picked up the massive sell-off and panicked. High-frequency trading bots joined the selling spree. $16, $15. Inside the cockpit of Flight 909, high above the dark Atlantic, Captain Miller was sipping coffee when the ACR's, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, printer whirred to life. Miller tore off the paper. It was a message from Skyway Operations Control in London. Urgent. Company stock. Crashing. Credit lines frozen. Fuel. Credit cards declined at Heathrow. Divert immediately. Return to JFK. Repeat. Return to JFK. We cannot pay landing fees in UK. Miller stared at the paper. "You have got to be kidding me." He keyed the intercom to the cabin. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew enough to know his paycheck was in danger. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have a minor technical administrative issue. We are going to have to turn the aircraft around and return to New York. I apologize for the inconvenience." In seat 1A, Brock Holloway woke up from a nap. He was annoyed. "Turn around. What for?" He pulled his phone out of flight mode to text his assistant to rebook him. As the Wi-Fi connected, his phone exploded with notifications. 75 missed calls, all from his boss at Redstone Capital. One text message sat at the top, sent 1 minute ago. "You idiot. What did you do? Kestrel Vanguard just pulled the funding. Skyway is bankrupt. We are insolvent. You are fired. Don't bother coming in." Brock stared at the screen, his blood running cold. He quickly opened his trading app. Skyway stock, $12.10. He had personally leveraged his own portfolio on this deal. He was not just fired, he was ruined. He looked at the empty seat across the aisle. Seat 1A on the other side. The seat Vivienne Toussaint should have been in. He realized then, with a sick feeling in his gut, that the woman in the hoodie wasn't just a passenger. She was the bank, and he had just kicked the bank off the plane. Back on the Gulf Stream, Vivienne watched the flight tracker. She saw Flight 909 make a slow, wide U-turn over the ocean. "They're turning back," she said, satisfied. "They can't afford to land in London." "Stock is at 11 $, Jonathan reported. "Skyway just issued a press release halting trading. It's a bloodbath, Viv. The board of directors of Skyway is calling my personal cell. They are begging for a meeting." "Tell them I'm busy," Vivienne said, reclining her leather seat. "Tell them I'll buy the airline out of bankruptcy court next week, for pennies on the dollar." She looked out the window at the stars. "But first," she added, I want a public apology. And I want it from Patricia. The descent back into New York was not smooth. The Airbus A350, heavy with unburned fuel, landed with a violent thud on the tarmac of JFK. The cabin, usually a sanctuary of hush-toned luxury in the front and quiet resignation in the back, was now a cauldron of fury. "Why are we back in New York?" a woman in 4D screamed. "I have a wedding in London in 6 hours." Patricia, the flight purser, looked haggard. Her perfect bun was fraying at the edges. She had spent the last 2 hours trying to calm passengers with warm nuts and lies about minor technical paperwork, but the Wi-Fi had stayed on long enough for the truth to leak. Passengers in economy were holding up their phones, showing the news articles. Airline insolvent. Skyway, Atlantic stock plummets, 60%. Mystery investor pulls billions after CEO kicked off flight. Patricia stared at a phone screen thrust in her face by an angry teenager in row 12. She saw the photo. It was a grainy image of Vivienne Toussaint being handcuffed, and below it, a headshot of Vivienne from the cover of Forbes, wearing a tailored white suit, looking like a goddess of commerce. Patricia felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the beverage cart to stop from falling. The hoodlum she had sneered at. The riffraff. It wasn't just a VIP. It was the woman who signed the paychecks. In seat 1A, Brock Halloway was hyperventilating. He wasn't worried about the wedding in London. He was worried about prison. He worked in finance. He knew the laws. He had used insider knowledge to leverage his position on the assumption the deal would go through. Now that the deal was dead, his firm wasn't just broke. They were exposed for reckless trading. As the plane taxied to the gate, the exact same gate they had left 3 hours ago, Brock grabbed his Rimowa bag before the seatbelt sign even turned off. "Sit down, sir," a junior flight attendant yelled. "Get out of my way," Brock shouted, pushing into the aisle. He had to get to a phone. He had to call his lawyer. He had to hide assets. The jet bridge extended. The door opened. Usually the ground staff is there to greet the plane. This time, it was a phalanx of suits. Standing right in the center of the jet bridge, flanked by Arthur Penhaligon and 3 other lawyers, was Vivienne Toussaint. She had changed. The hoodie was gone. She was now wearing a slate-gray power suit that cost more than the average American home. Her hair was sharp, her makeup flawless. She looked like the blade of a guillotine. Brock stumbled out of the plane first. He saw her. He stopped dead. "Ms. Toussaint," Brock stammered. He tried to put on his charm, that oily salesman grin that had worked for him his whole life. "Vivienne, look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was stressed. The market, you know, it gets to all of us." Vivienne didn't even look at him. She looked through him. "Arthur," she said softly. Arthur Penhaligon stepped forward and handed Brock a thick envelope. "Mr. Halloway, you are being served with a lawsuit for defamation, tortious interference with business contracts, and emotional damages. Furthermore, Kestrel Vanguard has just purchased the outstanding debt of Redstone Capital. We are calling in your firm's loans, effective immediately." Brock's jaw dropped. You can't. That's hostile. It's business," Vivienne said. "You wanted the seat? You can have the seat. You'll have plenty of time to sit in it while your firm is liquidated." She gestured to the side. "Move." Brock, pale and shaking, was shoved aside by his own panic. He ran up the jet bridge, dialing a phone that no one would ever answer again. Then, Patricia walked out. She was leading the crew, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. She saw Vivienne. She stopped. The color in her cheeks was high, a mix of shame and terror. "Miss Toussaint," Patricia began, her voice trembling. "I was just following protocol. The captain..." The captain made a decision based on your information. Vivienne cut her off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed in the metal tunnel. You looked at me and you decided I didn't belong. You decided my money wasn't green enough. You decided my presence disrupted your atmosphere. I didn't know who you were, Patricia whispered. That is exactly the point, Vivienne said, stepping closer. The height difference was negligible, but Vivienne seemed to tower over her. If I were a white man in a suit, would you have checked my ticket 3 times? Would you have called the police? Patricia looked down at her shoes. Answer me, Vivienne commanded. No, Patricia wept. No, I wouldn't have. You cost this airline $5 billion today, Patricia, Vivienne said. I hope you enjoyed the power trip. It was the most expensive power trip in aviation history. A man in a dark suit approached, the station manager for Skyway. He looked like he was having a heart attack. Ms. Toussaint, the manager gasped. Please, the board is on the line. The CEO, Mr. Preston Gould, is flying in from Chicago. They want to talk. They say this is all a misunderstanding. Vivienne checked her watch. Tell Preston he can meet me in the first-class lounge. He has 20 minutes. After that, I instruct my team to file for Chapter 7, liquidation of Skyway Atlantic. Liquidation? The manager's eyes bulged. That would end the airline. 30,000 jobs. Then I suggest Preston hurries, Vivienne said. She turned on her heel and walked up the jet bridge, her heels clicking a rhythm of war. The first-class lounge at JFK usually offered champagne and caviar. Today it offered silence and fear. Vivienne had commandeered the private conference room at the back. Her team had swept it for bugs. Now she sat at the head of the mahogany table. On the wall, a flat-screen TV displayed the Skyway stock price. It had bottomed out at $4.20. The company was essentially worthless. The door opened. Preston Gould walked in. Preston was a man who was used to being the most powerful person in the room. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore suits cut on Savile Row. But today, he looked small. He was followed by his general counsel and the VP of Public Relations. Vivienne, Preston said, extending a hand, thank you for meeting us. This has been a regrettable day. Vivienne didn't stand. She didn't shake his hand. She gestured to the chair opposite her. Sit, Preston. Preston hesitated, then sat. He tried to regain control. Look, obviously the incident on the plane was unacceptable. The flight attendant has been suspended. The passengers are being refunded. But pulling the funding, crashing the stock, this is an overreaction, Vivienne. It's reckless. Reckless? Vivienne laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Reckless is allowing your staff to treat your biggest investor like a criminal because of the color of her skin. Reckless is running an airline on such thin margins that one pulled loan collapses your entire house of cards. We can fix this, the general counsel interjected. We can issue a joint statement. You get an apology, we get the funding back. The stock recovers. Vivienne picked up a remote and turned off the TV screen. The room went dark for a second. I'm not interested in a statement, Vivienne said. I'm interested in acquisition. Preston blinked. Excuse me? You are insolvent, Preston. You can't pay your landing fees. You can't buy fuel. Tomorrow morning, your pilots won't fly because their paychecks will bounce. You are done. Vivienne slid a single piece of paper across the table. Unless you sign this. Preston picked up the paper. His hands shook as he read it. This is a buyout offer. For $3 order share? It's generous, Vivienne said, considering the stock is heading to zero. This values the company at next to nothing, and it gives Kestrel Vanguard 51% controlling interest. It makes you the owner. Correct, Vivienne said. And here, Preston's voice rose. Clause 4. Immediate resignation of the CEO, CFO, and VP of Operations? You allowed this culture to fester, Preston, Vivienne said, leaning forward. The rot starts at the head. You focused on exclusive atmospheres and premium branding while ignoring basic dignity. You hired people like Patricia. You catered to people like Brock Halloway. You built a club, not an airline. And now, I'm taking your club away. I won't sign it. Preston slammed the paper down. I'll fight you. I'll go to other investors. Who? Vivienne asked. Who touches a distressed asset that just racially profiled a black female billionaire? Do you know the optics? Any bank that touches you gets dragged into the mud with you. You are radioactive, Preston. The room was silent. The VP of PR whispered to Preston. She's right. The social media backlash is global. Our boycott Skyway is trending #1 in 40 countries. No one will lend to us. Preston slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him. He looked at the contract, then at Vivienne. If I sign, Preston said, his voice defeated. What happens to the employees? The pilots? The baggage handlers? The ones who do their jobs keep them, Vivienne said. I'm not a monster. I'm a capitalist. I want the airline to run. But the management? The culture? Burn to the ground. And Patricia? Preston asked. Patricia is already gone, Vivienne said. But I want her to serve as an example. She will be terminated for cause, no severance, and I want a public statement from the airline detailing exactly why. Preston took a gold pen from his pocket. He hovered over the paper. It was the end of his career. It was the end of his legacy, but it was the only way to save the company from total annihilation. He signed. Vivienne took the paper back. She checked the signature. Good choice, Preston. She looked at Jonathan, her CFO, who was standing in the corner. Release the funds, but only enough for fuel and payroll. I want to audit the rest. Yes, Ms. Toussaint. Vivienne stood up. Gentlemen, get out of my conference room. I have an airline to restructure. As Preston and his team shuffled out, looking like beaten dogs, Vivienne walked to the window. She looked out at the tarmac, where Skyway planes were lined up, their logos shining under the floodlights. Arthur Penhaligon packed his briefcase. A productive day, I'd say. You acquired a global carrier for the price of a regional bus line. It wasn't about the price, Arthur, Vivienne said. No? No, she turned back to him. It was about the seat. I paid for seat 1A, and now I own every seat on the plane. But the story wasn't quite over. Karma had hit the airline, and it had hit the executives. But there was one loose end, Brock Halloway. And the universe, with a little help from Vivienne's legal team, was about to deliver the final twist. The sky over Queens had turned a bruised, violent purple, unleashing a torrential downpour that seemed determined to wash the sins of the day into the gutters of JFK Terminal 4. The air outside the sliding glass doors was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes, wet asphalt, and the frantic energy of travelers trying to escape the weather. Vivienne Toussaint stepped out of the terminal, the automatic doors parting for her like the Red Sea. She didn't flinch at the cold wind that whipped around the concrete pillars. She was insulated, not just by her cashmere coat, but by the impenetrable armor of total victory. Flanking her was Arthur Penhaligon, who held a large black umbrella over her head with the steady hand of a royal guard, and Cole, her head of security, who scanned the crowd with practiced indifference. Waiting at the curb was a convoy of 3 black Cadillac Escalades, their engines idling with a low, predatory rumble. Their tinted windows reflected the chaotic neon lights of the airport, offering a glimpse into a world of silence, safety, and power. Vivienne moved toward the middle vehicle. She was ready for a glass of vintage wine and the quiet hum of a drive back to Manhattan. But before her hand could touch the door handle, a commotion erupted near the taxi stand. "Vivienne! Ms. Toussaint! Stop! Please, just wait!" The voice was shrill, cracking with a desperation that cut through the noise of honking taxis and police whistles. Cole stepped forward immediately, his massive frame blocking Vivienne's path, one hand raised in a universal command to halt. "Step back," he rumbled. Vivienne paused. She turned slowly, her heels pivoting on the wet pavement. Emerging from the throngs of tourists and families was a figure that was almost unrecognizable. It was Brock Holloway. Only hours ago, he had been the master of the universe, sipping stolen scotch in a leather recliner at 30,000 feet. Now, he looked like a drowned rat. His bespoke navy suit, which had cost $4,000, was soaked through, clinging to his frame in pathetic folds. His silk tie was undone, hanging limp around his neck like a noose. He was dragging his aluminum Rimowa suitcase behind him, the expensive wheels rattling violently over the uneven cracks in the sidewalk. He shoved past a bewildered family of 4, ignoring their shouts, his eyes locked maniacally on Vivienne. "Let him through, Cole," Vivienne said softly. Her voice was barely a whisper, but Cole heard it. He lowered his arm, though his muscles remained coiled, ready to strike. Brock stumbled into the open space between the terminal wall and the convoy. He was panting heavily, rain dripping from the tip of his nose. He looked at the warm, dry interior of the SUV, then at Vivienne. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrified, hollowed-out realization of his own fragility. "My cards!" Brock gasped, wiping water from his eyes. They aren't working." Vivienne looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "Is that so?" "I tried to call an Uber," Brock stammered, his hands shaking as he held up his phone. The screen was cracked. "Declined. I went to the kiosk to buy a bottle of water. Declined. I called my assistant, and the line is dead. Redstone, they froze everything. My personal accounts, my joint accounts, my credit lines. I have zero access. That is standard procedure during a forensic audit of a liquidated firm," Arthur Penhaligon interjected. His tone was dry, clinical, and devoid of sympathy. "When the SEC and the FBI open a joint investigation into market manipulation and insider trading, a total asset freeze is the first step. You are a flight risk, Mr. Holloway." "Fraud?" Brock's voice pitched up an octave. "I didn't commit fraud. I just made the aggressive call. Everyone does it." "You leveraged a position based on insider knowledge of a deal you were actively sabotaging by harassing the principal investor," Vivienne said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts were heavier than any shout. "You bet against the house, Brock, but you forgot that I own the casino." Brock stared at her. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him harder than the rain. He looked around the chaotic pickup zone. He saw the long line for taxis he couldn't pay for. He saw the private cars picking up executives, the tribe he used to belong to. Vivienne. "Ms. Toussaint," Brock pleaded, his pride dissolving into the puddles around his Italian leather shoes. "Please. I have no way home. My driver left when the news broke. My apartment is on the Upper East Side. We're going to the same place. Just give me a ride to the city." Professional courtesy? It was a staggering request. The man who had sneered at her hoodie, who had called her sweetheart and told her to go to the back of the plane, was now begging for a jump seat in her motorcade. Vivienne looked at him. For a fleeting second, the silence stretched, and Brock dared to hope. He thought he saw a glimmer of mercy in her eyes. After all, she had won. She had the airline, She had the money. Surely she could afford to be gracious. "I would love to help you, Brock," Vivian said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. Brock exhaled, his shoulders slumping in relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I just need—" "But," Vivian cut him off, her voice hardening into diamond, "my insurance policy has extremely strict rules about who I allow in my vehicles." Brock froze. "What? What rules?" Vivian leaned in slightly, close enough that he could smell her perfume, a scent of expensive oud and victory. "No liabilities allowed," she whispered, "and you, Brock, are a liability." "I'll sit in the front," Brock cried out, taking a step forward. Cole instantly stepped in, pushing him back with a single hand to the chest. "I won't say a word. I'll be invisible." "It's not about the noise, Brock," Vivian said, straightening up and smoothing the lapel of her coat. She looked him up and down, mimicking the exact look of disdain he had given her on the jet bridge. "It's just that you simply don't fit the atmosphere we are trying to maintain here." The words hit him like a physical blow. It was his own weapon, sharpened and turned against him. Vivian turned her back on him. She slid into the back seat of the Escalade. The heavy, armored door slammed shut with a thud that sounded like a coffin lid closing. As the convoy began to roll forward, tires hissing on the wet pavement, the rear window of the second vehicle rolled down. Arthur Penhaligon peered out, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. "Oh, Mr. Halloway!" Arthur called out over the sound of the rain. Brock looked up, desperate, thinking perhaps they had changed their minds. He chased the car for a few steps. "Yes? Yes?" "That watch," Arthur said, pointing a slender finger at the Rolex Daytona on Brock's wrist, a $40,000 piece of steel and gold. "That was purchased with a company retention bonus last quarter, correct?" Brock covered the watch with his other hand, instinctively. "Yes." "Why?" "Technically, that is now the property of Kestrel Vanguard as part of the asset seizure. We wouldn't want to add theft of corporate property to your indictment." Arthur adjusted his glasses. "I suggest you hand it over to that police officer standing by the crosswalk. Immediately." The window rolled up. The convoy accelerated, merging into the stream of taillights leaving the airport, disappearing into the red haze of the night. Brock stood alone in the rain. He was shivering violently now. He looked at the police officer 10 yards away, who was watching him with suspicion. Slowly, painfully, Brock unclasped the watch. It felt heavy in his hand. He walked over and handed it to the confused officer, mumbling something about evidence, before turning away. He had nothing. No money. No phone. No watch. No status. A screech of air brakes pierced the air. A massive blue and white city bus, the Q3, lurched to a halt at the curb. It was the only transport that took cash. It was crowded, steaming with humidity, and smelled of wet wool, diesel, and fast food. Brock looked at the bus. It was a humiliating chariot, a far cry from the lie-flat beds of first class. He reached into his soaked trouser pocket and found 2 crumpled dollar bills he had kept for a tip he never gave. He stepped up onto the bus. The fluorescent lights were harsh and flickering, casting a sickly green pallor on his face. The driver, a large man who had no patience for men in suits holding up his schedule, glared down at him. "You getting on, buddy?" the driver shouted, his hand hovering over the lever to close the door. "Move it or lose it." Brock Halloway, the platinum key holder, the master of the universe, hung his head. He dropped the damp bills into the plastic collector. He looked down the aisle. The bus was packed. There were no seats at the front. People jostled him, their wet umbrellas brushing against his face. "Move back," the driver yelled, his voice echoing Brock's earlier cruelty with terrifying precision. "It's full up front. Back of the bus!" Brock squeezed past the strollers, the tired workers, and the students. His expensive Rimowa case banged against his own shins, bruising him with every step. He pushed deeper and deeper into the crowd until he hit the rear wall. He found a spot to stand in the very last row, right next to the roaring engine. The heat from the motor burned his leg. The bus lurched forward, throwing him off balance, and he had to grab a greasy handrail to stay upright. As the bus pulled onto the highway, leaving the airport behind, Brock closed his eyes. He realized then that the universe didn't just have a sense of humor. It had a guillotine, and the blade had just fallen. They say money talks, but in this story, money didn't just talk. It screamed. Vivian Toussaint proved that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room, having the platinum status, or wearing the most expensive suit. True power is ownership. When Skyway Atlantic and Brock Holloway tried to humiliate her based on how she looked, they forgot the golden rule of business. Never bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand has the power to sign a check that buys your entire existence. Vivian didn't yell. She didn't fight the police in the aisle. She simply waited, calculated, and then bought the battlefield so she could rewrite the rules. It's a brutal, beautiful lesson in karma. Be careful who you step on while you're climbing the ladder, because they might just be the one waiting to kick it out from under you. If you enjoyed this story of financial warfare and absolute justice, please smash that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see a bully get exactly what they deserve, and hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next one. Stay humble.